Paul Levy, on behalf of Michael and Ian and Philip Baldwin and the Marian Institute, welcome to the Three Brothers Quest.
Yeah, I'm so honored to be here with you. Thank you for the invite.
It's really glad to have you. So our topic today, Paul, is your astonishing book, The Quantum Revelation. I'm going to hold it up here. The subtitle of which is A Radical Synthesis of Science and Spirituality. And you have some good news about this book. Tell us what's coming.
Yes, I have some good news. It's going to be, it's coming out in a new and expanded edition a week before Christmas, because after writing the book, and it made a big impact, people who read it were really deeply, affected. And then I began getting more downloads. And then I was lucky enough to find this new publisher who's actually in your area.
Yes.
And which is crazy. And yeah, so I was fortunate to be able to have, there's a new and expanded edition with the downloads and coming out in a few months. So that's the good news.
Yeah, and we should make it clear we're talking about in Rochester, Vermont, just south of us here at 3BQHQ. Rochester, Vermont, the publisher is Inner Traditions. And
Right.
you said you're playing with a new subtitle for this book.
Yeah, the new subtitle, I think it's Awakening to the Dreamlike Nature of Reality. And I really like that because that's in essence, quantum physics is a revelation. And it's a revelation that we've all dreamed up 100 years ago into the world and into our minds. And it's revealing to us the dreamlike nature. And that's what the book is about. And that's an experience I began having 40 plus years ago that was very destabilizing at the time. And I'm still a work in progress trying to integrate what I realized. And then I came across quantum physics and I, right away was like, oh my God, they're pointing at the dreamlike nature, but the traditionally trained corporate academic physicists aren't trained to recognize this being a dream. And not being a physicist, at all, I'm sort of outside of the programming. So here I'm coming in and 40 years of studying quantum physics and saying, look, this is what it's showing us. It's a revelation of the dreamlike nature.
I love this. And that shift in subtitle captures so much, and it's worth flagging here at the top of our conversation. You're moving from the current subtitle, A Radical Synthesis of Science and Spirituality, to a new subtitle, Awakening to the Dreamlike Nature of Reality. That's so beautiful.
Yeah,
Can we start with quantum?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
how do you make sense of this word that we hear so much now in the culture, quantum?
Right. Well, okay. So quantum physics was really one way to talk about it. It was conceived of or discovered or created, invented, about 100 years ago. And where before quantum physics came on the scene, physicists conceived of this world as existing objectively separate from us, the observer. And, the physicists were just studying the world, trying to understand what it was. And then quantum physics came along and it blew that idea out of the water. It proved empirically again and again that there's no such thing as an objective world separate from the observer, that the observer via the act of observation is actually influencing the world observed. And I should just point out that's a description of a dream. That's exactly what a dream is. And so what they discovered was that quantum physicists were trying to understand what are the physical building blocks of this universe? What is the microstructure? And the more they went down in scale, the more they didn't find anything that had to do with matter, but they found something that had to do with consciousness. And they began to discover that this universe is quantum through and through on every scale, not just on the smallest micro scale, but even on the macro scale. And, so this is a fully quantum universe. And the question is, what does that mean? And that's where I really go down the rabbit hole, because in essence, this is really quantum physics in a like a thumbnail sketch. when you realize that the idea of there being an objective world, that's a nonsensical idea with no correlate in reality that only exists as an idea in our mind. And when you go down that rabbit hole, you discover, oh my God, what this is actually pointing at is that the act of observation, we're not just passively observing a separate universe, but the act of observation is creative. We are somehow participating in evoking the creation of the universe in this very moment. And that's pointing at that we, each one of us as individuals, have this enormous untapped power within us that's intrinsic to our nature. And to the extent that we're not aware of it, then we dream up a world like we are living in now where we're destroying ourselves. So I basically point out that quantum physics, it's a revelation and it's offering us the medicine for the incredible insanity and evil that's playing out in our world. And just one final thing, I just watched this, one of my favorite, quantum physicists, he's living, this guy, Christopher Fuchs, being interviewed, and he started off by saying the very first words of his interview was quantum physics makes life worth living. And I couldn't say it better myself.
And that was Christopher Fuchs, who is a quantum physicist.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Paul, can I ask you just on a technical thing? Your screen is just bouncing a little bit. I don't know if it's if you can stabilize it or not.
Okay, well, it's sitting on my lap because I just moved into a
yeah,
new
of course.
apartment
Yeah,
and
no
haven't
worries.
gotten my furniture. I don't have
Oh,
my
it's
desk.
okay. I was going to say,
So
it
yeah,
looks like
maybe that's good. I'll try to not
well, you're
move my knee or
participating.
something, Yeah.
You are your own participant observer, as we're saying. I love that.
Right, totally.
I wanted to, you have this really beautiful moment in the preface of your book, Paul, where you write this related to the word quantum. You write, the quantum is a sacred treasure whose liberating power can transform the whole universe.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
arresting.
Yeah, I can say more about that. So,
Please.
so I'm a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for years, and the tradition I do practice in, the way the teachings propagate themselves over time is via these things called the hidden treasures. In Tibetan, it's dharma. And that's one of the things in the new edition of the book I really unfold a lot more, because in essence, and I'll explain what that is, but in essence, like I actually spoke at a big science conference a few years ago, and I basically announced that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a spiritual treasure, to one of these dharma that we or physicists discovered, and we're first in the beginning stages of unpacking it. Now, these hidden treasures, and keep in mind, this isn't like a fairy tale thing. This is a real thing, a real phenomena. Scholars study this, and the lineage of Tibetan Buddhism that I do practice, this is the way they keep their teachings fresh and pure. And the idea is that there are hidden treasures that are hidden and coded within the multidimensional fabric of the universe. Okay. And it's very much like in a dream, there are symbols in a dream that when the dreamer is at the point of being able to, to have a realization, the dream will all of it, the symbol will emerge. And if the dreamer gets into this resonance with the symbol, psychic energy gets unlocked and they expand their awareness and they deepen their connection to themselves. The dharma, the hidden tradition, the hidden treasure, it's the same idea that particularly when we as a species get out of balance, like in Tibetan Buddhism, when the community got out of balance, there would be a dharma, a hidden treasure that was discovered. And just like the unconscious is compensatory, it compensates a one-sidedness by sending us symbols. When we as a species get really one-sided, like we are right now, whether it's, oh, we're too much into scientific materialism or getting too absorbed in darkness or self-destructive behavior, seen like a dream, this universe will all of a sudden, out of this universe and into the universe simultaneous, will manifest a particular hidden treasure that, if gotten into resonance with, will bring the practitioner and the community back into balance. And I'm pointing out that that's a really helpful way of viewing quantum physics.
Yes, after several hundred years of classical or mechanical physics, it's described by many names. This new quantum physics is a compensatory, revelatory symbol or set of symbols, essentially.
Right,
Can,
right, right.
can you say something? You've used this word resonance a couple of times. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Resonance.
So it's not quantum physics is not just something like an idea in our head, but it's actually reflecting to us, that this universe is a participatory universe. Okay. It's a very famous phrase. And the idea being that here quantum physics is emerging through experiments and it's empirically proven and it's never been proven wrong and it's the most accurate theory ever, to the point where if these quantum physicists say if another theory comes up that contradicts it, just ignore it. It's like this is the thing. We have to come to terms with what it's showing us. But it's not just something that we intellectually understand, or it's not just an idea. When we get into this resonance with what it's showing us, we actively in a way, step into the dream and connect with our agency and our creative power as one of the dreamers of the dream. That's to get into resonance with the deeper sort of symbolism, because the physicists are saying, yeah, quantum physics is a symbolic procedure. And interestingly, in Buddhism, one of the words for enlightenment, Mahamudra, translates as the great symbol. It also translates as the great attitude. So the idea is that this universe is a symbol symbolizing itself. And when you actually see that and get into alignment with that, and into resonance with that, it unlocks this unimaginably vast creative agency and power that each of us have, which is interesting because part of the spell that's being cast by the mainstream media and by what's happening in the greater body politic is that, oh, we're impotent, we're helpless, we're only one person out of 8 billion other, people, and all that. And on one level, there's truth to that, but that's not the whole truth, because the other part of the truth is each one of us are incredibly powerful agents and we have enormous creative power. And what I'm pointing out is, to the extent that the majority of us are not in touch consciously with our power to create our experience, which is what quantum physics is showing us, then we're going to dream up a nightmare like we see all around us today.
Yes, Michael Baldwin, if I may channel him for a moment, he flagged this beautiful passage from your book. You write, quantum physics is returning physics to its root in metaphysics, thereby becoming a spiritual path.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, and can you say a bit more about how one might align oneself with this resonance of which you speak? And feel free to draw on your own personal experience because clearly you're
Yeah.
blending the spiritual and the scientific here as a
Yeah.
long-term
Yeah.
Buddhist
Sure.
practitioner.
Well,
How do we align?
I point out in the book that quantum physics, in a way, it's actually promoting itself to become a spiritual path,
Mm.
because in essence, quantum physics, when you see, here's the thing. All the physicists I know, they're all basically saying the same thing. They're saying this is the greatest discovery ever in all of history in the realm of science. They all agree in that, but they don't agree. And there's all this conflict around what does it mean?
Ah,
Okay. And the idea is when what I try to point out in my own, with my whatever the limited capability I have, um, is that when you really go down the quantum physics rabbit hole, it's shedding light on who we are. Okay.
mm,
And if I could just say something about that, because, you know, quantum physics has proven that there's no objective world out there, that the act of observing, like I was saying, influences the universe observed. That's very much like a dream. So what that means, or one of the implications is that when we conceive or think of the world as being objective, being like a dream, which is just a reflection of our mind, the universe will manifest as if it's objective, which will then confirm to us the truth of our perspective that the universe is separate and objective. So we become more entrenched in that viewpoint ad infinitum. That's a self-reinforcing feedback loop. That's the nature of a spell. And in essence, we've hypnotized ourselves by our own creative genius to think the world exists in a way it doesn't. But that's only half of the equation. The other half is once we conceive of the world as being objective, instantaneously, we are dreaming ourselves up to be a subject, to be an ego that's having a relationship to the object, to the objective world. The point is that our experience or our idea of the objective world and our subjective experience of existing as a reference point in third dimensional space and time, i.e., as an ego, they reciprocally co-arise and reinforce each other. And in a way that gives us all the evidence we need of the truth of our viewpoint. That's the self-hypnosis. That's the malady that our species is suffering from. And that's what I'm trying in that book, in all my books, to write about, to help people to see through that. Because in essence, there is an illusion generating illusion. That's a David Bohm term. He talks about this. And if you don't see the primary illusion, it's going to generate a host of other illusions. And we're then just caught in that illusion with no escape, no exit policy.
And does this explain, Paul, the incredibly high level of alienation, of atomization, of loneliness, of despair, of anxiety, of stress that clearly so many of us are grappling with in this moment?
Yeah, totally. Because, when I say what I just described as the malady, I've written 3 books. You're aware of this mind virus, the Wetiko mind virus. And in essence, what that is it's an imagination that we exist as a separate self. And as soon as we exist as a separate self, which then is an expression of thinking the world exists separate from us as an object, then being a dream, we attract all the evidence we need, confirming our sense of being separate. And then other people are others. As soon as there's an other, there's fear, and fear is the superfood for the mind virus. So the point is that our species, it's exactly as if we're under a spell. And what I'm trying to do, to the extent that I've woken up out of the spell, and I'm a work in progress like all of us, is to help people to not only to see the spell, but to see there's no one out there who's casting the spell on us. We are casting it on ourselves. And that means we have the power to dispel the spell.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we're hoping you and I perhaps to have another second conversation about your work around Wetiko, the mind virus. We're teasing it here, but essentially what you're doing here, Paul, is taking the quantum notion of the participant observer and bringing it into the spiritual realm and holding it accountable for either dreaming ourselves into co-participation, co-creation with the universe on the positive end, or this malady of which you speak, where we're dreaming ourselves into the other, the alienation, the isolation.
Yeah, because if you see through that process,
Mm.
and it's something, I don't want any, people don't need to take my word for it. Just do the experiment yourself. And this is actually a quote of the Buddha. He was saying, look, don't take my word for it. Just do the experiment. Look within your own mind. See if what I'm saying is true. And, when you see through that imagination that we exist in a way that we don't, then all of a sudden, what you recognize is that we're interconnected, we're interdependent, that there is no separate self. And you see, the thing which is crazy about once we identify with a separate self, we then invest all of our psychic energy for the rest of our lives defending and protecting this illusory separate self that doesn't even exist.
Mm.
And that's a form of madness because that same psychic energy could be funneled and channeled into compassion, into love, into being creative.
Yeah, wow. Yes. And I want to come back to how we align. There's another moment you write, which speaks to exactly what you're saying. You say this, we become, and I love this term, we become mything mything links, not missing links, but mything links.
Yeah, yeah.
We do not just live in the universe, but the universe lives in us. Can you unpack that notion of mythology here?
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Please.
Because what that has to do with is that as we more awaken to our nature and to the nature of the universe and to our relationship to the universe, that we're discovering we're not separate from, we discover that we're just playing roles in some sort of cosmic drama. And it's like a fairy tale or a myth or an archetypal higher dimension is informing this universe, and we're all getting cast into roles and to play something out. And to the extent that we awaken to that more expanded awareness, then we get more enlisted into playing a role because we're seeing the deeper our place in the universe. We then more get cast into a role to be of benefit to unfold this mythic archetypal process that's happening anyway, but because it's happening unconsciously, it typically tends to get enacted destructively. But once we become conscious of, oh, wow, it's almost like there's some higher dimensional energy that's incarnating through all of us. And when we become conscious of that, we can channel that process via our individuation process. And at a certain point, it doesn't become an individual process. We discover, oh, because we're interconnected, I can actually, if I help you, I get as much benefit as you do because we're not separate. You see, the idea is that what is being offered to us is the possibility, the real possibility of stepping out of the illusion of thinking we exist as a separate self, which creates the fear and the mind virus and the wars and the evil and all that, and basically just having the realization of the truth of who we are to each other and who we are in ourselves and relative to the world.
Yes. So let's push on that a little bit. How do you, Paul, suggest we align, we resonate, we tap into these mything links, to use your terminology? It's so beautiful. And again, feel free to speak out of your own experience, and then we'll push back on some more quantum and physics in a moment. But what's your advice? People listening and watching, like, how do I do what he's how do I do what he's
Yeah,
suggesting?
yeah, yeah. Well, on the one hand, in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the teacher teaching, and the Sangha is most interesting is the community. And the idea is that when you hang out with people who are also awakening to whatever degree they are, you discover it's not a competitive sport, but we can all like help each other to deepen all of our awakening. And I want to point out one of the things that's really emerging out of the revelation that is quantum physics is intrinsic to our nature. We are creative beings. Our nature is to be creative. And I point out again and again in all my work, particularly in the work on the mind virus, that the antidote, the medicine, the cure for the madness and for the evil that we're confronted with in our world and in ourselves is to be creative. It's like to take that same energy that is unconsciously channeled in a destructive way and to actually constructively express it creatively. And that's something, when you embody that and when you express yourself in that way, the experience of the realization of your nature just continually deepens. And by embodying that, it's contagious. You then, people who have eyes to see and get in resonance with, what you're tapped into, then they become creative. And then, that can go viral, and that can incredibly impact the whole non-local field and the collective unconscious of our species in a way that can change everything.
So beautiful. And this speaks to the power of the arts, of literature, of music, of poetry, of song, of prayer, all of these creative human endeavors that
Well,
perhaps.
even more than that, I mean, all of those are great, but I don't want people to have a flatland idea of, oh, being creative means I have to paint or draw or dance. No, the way we go about every moment of our lives, is a form of art and is creative. And this is where quantum physics comes in, because quantum physics has discovered, empirically proven again and again and again, that our perception is creative. And what that means is that, so quantum physics, like I'm saying, has proven that this universe is a collectively shared dream. Well, what is a dream? It's a reflection of the mind. So the way, or it's like, think about it like an ink blot. The way we project onto the ink blot has an effect on how the ink blot will manifest to our mind. So the way we interpret the waking ink blot of our lives each and every moment has an actual effect on our experience, that the meaning we place onto our experiences moment by moment has an active effect on our experience of who we are. And that's profound. And that's like even deeper than just, oh, I have to draw or paint, you know?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. In your book, The Quantum Revelation, you quote physicist Henry Stapp, quote, he says, "We live in an idea-like world, in a world that is like an idea or thought giving itself form, or like a dream while we are in it." And it seems like this is what you're getting at. Mind, classical, or yeah, classical physics was so focused on matter, on atoms banging around and electrons roaming around. But what you're suggesting with the quantum view is that we replace, or maybe not replace, we elevate mind over matter. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, and I would even, push back around saying elevating, sort of mind over matter, because from the point of view of, whatever, of like whatever reality is, there's no difference between mind and matter. So we don't have to elevate one or the other. They're an inseparable sort of this unity. And what I'm basically saying, and this is, I think, what makes my book on quantum physics so radical, but this maps onto, you see, I began having experiences of this being a dream 40 plus years ago. And it got me in deep trouble because I was so excited that, people thought I was having a psychotic break. And I was just like, so, just overwhelmed with what I was realizing. Like, things began happening in my life that were physically impossible, that could only happen in dreams. And I had no reference point, I had no context. And so what quantum physics has basically discovered is the dreamlike nature of reality. And I, just to tell a little anecdote, there was a number of years ago, this eminent Tibetan translator came to have tea over in my house, and we got into a little bit of a disagreement where he was saying, no, the teachings of the Buddha, he's saying this is like a dream, it's metaphorical. And I was saying there's no metaphor at all. He was saying this is a dream. This is nothing other than a dream. And because this is such a dream, and so totally a dream in every, atom and molecule, that to the extent we think this is not a dream, well, this dreamlike universe will then shapeshift instantaneously and manifest and reflect back, giving us all the evidence proving that it's not a dream, because that's the way we're seeing it. So we basically entranced ourselves by our mind's own genius. See, that's what I'm trying to shed light on.
Yes, and that is very different than saying this is a metaphor. You're saying, no, this is actually happening.
It's a collective dream, and we are the dream characters in each other's dream. We're embodied reflective aspects of each other, and we are part of the dream being dreamed by what I call the deeper dreaming self. And think of the deeper dreaming self as like a meditating Buddha, and he or she is having a dream, and we're it. And at the same time, we're not separate from that meditating Buddha.
Page 218 of your book, you're discussing the soul, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts about this here, but beautiful passage. You write this: to see that the world doesn't exist as an object out there, combined with seeing that we don't exist as an objective or measurable subject in here, is the doorway to the
Yeah.
realization of the dreamlike nature of reality, the very realization that quantum physics is ultimately revealing to us. I love that story you just told about your disagreement, because
Yeah.
I was unsure of that myself. You're saying this is no mere metaphor. This is what is happening when we essentially acknowledge moment by moment the quantum.
Yeah, well, one way to think about it is by invoking the imagination. So, if we imagine that we're having a night dream, right? And you're in a night dream, and in a typical night dream, you're not aware that you're dreaming. So you think whatever universe you're in is objective, is solid, is real, is separate from yourself, right? And then say something happens in the dream and you have lucidity and you recognize all you've done is you've recognized the nature of your situation. Oh, that I'm in a dream. I'm actually, inside of my own psyche. Okay. Now, what I'm pointing out, one way to imagine it is then imagine the other dream characters in that dream that you've just awakened in and you've stabilized that lucidity. And they're all, dream characters of yours, they're aspects of yourself. And say if you imagine that they're also awakening to the dreamlike nature and you all come together and hang out and trip out on and contemplate, oh my God, what are we realizing? We're realizing that this universe we're in that we thought was objective and solid and real and was fundamentally made of matter is actually an expression of our co-dreaming. That it's manifesting the way it is because we've been programmed to dream it in this limited, problematic way. And, I imagine very easily if you get people in that dream who are having that experience together, they would very quickly discover, oh, wow, we can actually get in phase with each other and change the dream we're having to reflect back who we're discovering ourselves to be, which is that we're not separate. And that's not just some sort of like imagination. That's the nature of our situation right now. That's what's being offered to us to realize. And that's not some sort of new age woo-woo gobbledygook. That's actually the reality of our situation. And if we don't realize that, I would say then we're doomed to destroy ourselves, really.
Yeah, yeah. Page 245 of your book, you write this: matter is an illusion that is fabricated within our brain and nervous system and is experienced in such a way as to trick us into seeing it as physically real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. So,
Yeah.
so, so you in your book, The Quantum Revelation, you talk quite a bit about how physicists grappled with these discoveries. And can you talk a bit about Einstein's demon? The brothers and I were very curious because Einstein is sort of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
he's kind of elevated as the guy, and yet
Right. Right.
he I don't he appears to never have made his peace with quantum physics.
Yeah, no, he
What
didn't. His biographer said this was Einstein's greatest demon. He thought way
yes,
more about the quantum than he did about relativity,
yes.
And so now, first off, he was one of the founding fathers of quantum physics, and he very famously said, quantum physics is so uncommonly important, it should be everyone's concern. And I just want to highlight that. This isn't just some sort of esoteric, abstract, philosophical thing. No, this should be all of our like fundamental concern that there's been a huge game-changing discovery that's been made, i.e. quantum physics, and it would incredibly transform all of us and our universe as we take in the realization. So here's the situation with Einstein, and it was really interesting for me as I studied, and I was reading all these books, for years, and he was never able to embrace quantum physics. And how come that was? He was attached to that there was an objective universe. And, in one of his, I think it was, he was actually quoted as saying, do you mean to tell me that if I'm not looking at the moon doesn't exist? And, it was very much getting into the realm of like a Zen koan, like if a tree falls in the forest and if there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? It was like that level of contemplation. And Einstein, because the whole fundamental sort of matrix of pre-quantum physics was that there is an objective universe that we need to understand and all that, and Einstein was never able to let go of that, and in a way that was really sort of sad. And Yeah, but meanwhile, he was one of the people who brought it in, who discovered it.
Yeah, there's two moments from your book on this that I just really opened my mind. Einstein writes, if quantum theory is correct, it signifies the end of physics.
Yeah, 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 right. Well, because he understood, and a lot of physicists were having this realization, is that the world they thought they were living in didn't exist. And it was like the rug had gotten pulled out from under them, and there was no place to take a stand, because not only was the nature of the world put into question, but the nature of themselves, of who they were. And it was kind of like, you could think of it like a caterpillar, slowly transforming into a butterfly, but it had no idea of where it was going to wind up. It was very much like that. Like they were pulling on these threads, and I don't keep in mind that they had no idea what was going to unfold. Quantum physics is such a radical discovery. We're only 100 years in. We're like at the very beginning of like the seashore of understanding what is it showing us. And here I am. I'm not a physicist. If one of these physics books has equations and math, I put it down. No, I was interested in what is there's some sort of underlying metaphysical, philosophical implication of what they were discovering. And the typical physicist, if you asked about those implications, those metaphysical implications, the typical response is shut up and calculate. Just, stop making a problem, because basically consciousness had entered the physics lab, and it was like, in a way, they're a skeleton in the closet. And the typically corporatized, academically trained physicists weren't prepared. They didn't know what to do with that. That's not what they signed on for. And but then here's somebody like me who's just, wow, that's really interesting, and that maps on, because in essence, what happened to me is that I had a quantum jump where all of a sudden, this is in 1981, I was living in a universe, in the mainstream universe, something happened, and all of a sudden, the very next moment, I was in a different universe that simulated the first, looked exactly like it, but it couldn't have been more different. That all of a sudden, things that I had thought of were impossible were happening. And to say I was destabilized, I was 24 years old. I don't know if anybody could have been prepared for what I happened to fall into. And like I had made reference to, I immediately got diagnosed as, oh, you're mentally ill, you're crazy, you'll have to be on medication the rest of your life. But I knew. I mean, my experience was really clear.
Mm.
And I was fortunate. I mean, it was quite a journey and wasn't easy to be able to integrate enough, and then to be able to find my voice and express what I was realizing in a way that I think has been helpful for people.
It does feel like reading your book, Paul, The Quantum Revelation, like it was kind of doves descending from heaven, and almost truly a revelation, or a series of epiphanies. And
That's the way they describe quantum physics itself, is that it's like this talisman that came from the heavens, from God. And it like created all this technology and all this stuff, but they had no idea, like, what's this about? Where did it come from? And the thing that it brings up for me, quantum physics has already changed the history of our world with all the technologies, with computers, lasers, transistors, on and on and on, atomic energy. And but the people who really study it saying that's just the low-hanging fruit. Okay, that the real impact that quantum physics is going to have is going to be within our mind, the way we think. Okay, and it's kind of like this. One of the metaphors, they say, it's like coming across an automobile in a forest, and nobody's ever seen an automobile, and they don't know what it's about, and they turn on the turn signal, or turn on the headlights or the radio, but they still haven't figured out what is the real purpose of this thing, this car. They say it's exactly like that with quantum physics. And they're also saying we deeply intuit it's going to be an incredibly, like, the central idea is going to be so simple that we'll be able to express it on a bumper sticker or a t-shirt. And I'm pointing out, as a non-physicist, what it's the central idea, what it's a revelation of is that we're dreaming, is that we're having a collectively shared dream. And when enough of us have that realization and get in resonance with each other and in alignment and in sync and in phase with each other, we can change the dream. And what that is, that's to actually consciously step into our own evolution. And that's what this is all about.
Mm. You were anticipating my next question, which is, what do you see for the future of quantum physics? And I think you just answered that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I want to just bring in something. You see, quantum physics, there's one quantum physicist. He says, yeah, when I get depressed, there are two things that are my go-to. One is I'll put on Beethoven or I'll study quantum physics, you know. And so quantum physics, like I was saying, they were trying to understand the building blocks, the microstructure of this universe, and they came upon these things that weren't made of matter. They called them, either quantum, entities or elementary particles, and they were of the nature of consciousness. And to more describe them, these quantum elementary particles existed in any and every possible state they ever could up until the moment of observation. And then they actualize into one particular specific manifestation. All the other possibilities just vaporize into parallel worlds. And then the same process happens at each and every moment. Now, what this means, and this isn't me, these are some of the founding fathers pointing out, they point out that even if one of those possibilities is highly ridiculously, that's a quote, improbable, it could happen this very next moment. Okay. What that means is that the fact that a sufficient number of our species could awaken in this moment, and maybe one of the listeners, maybe even one person, having the realization of the quantum, seeing the dreamlike nature, however you describe it, that might be the very moment that catalyzes a shift in the entire collective unconscious of our species. Quantum physics says that is entirely possible. And if we're not thinking in that way, then what in the world are we thinking? Then we're part of the problem.
Mm. Wow, that's both beautiful and profound and a bit terrifying in a nice way.
Yeah, well, because it's pointing at the incredible responsibility that we have.
Yes. Yeah, each of us. Yeah. Can I ask you, is the word thinking the right verb to describe what you chart here? Is feeling a better? I was struggling with that as I was reading this book. And we're so cerebral, we're so intellectual, particularly scientists of the classical type. And they seem to be unable, like Einstein, to come to grips with the dreamlike nature you're describing. So I guess my question is like, what's the best avenue in to the quantum?
Yeah, yeah, the best. And I would say, one of the things that really spoke to me when I was doing all of the study in writing the book was the sense of, one way of understanding it is that the real deeper way of understanding what's like the fundamental source matrix is experience.
Ah,
Is whatever is happening moment by moment, whatever is happening in the seemingly physical world, there's never not awareness as part of the equation, but we tend to overlook that subjective experience, as a classical Newtonian scientist, and think the primary thing is matter, but when you go into, like, even in experience, like, for example, in quantum physics and in Buddhism, they'll talk about, okay, say after a rain, there's this rainbow, and you see the image of the rainbow, right? And they'll point out, they say, oh, there's no objective rainbow out there that you're seeing. What is the nature of the rainbow? It's three factors. It's water, it's sunlight, and it's a mind. When those three factors get into relationship, we then experience the rainbow. And what is our experience of the rainbow? There's no rainbow out there. It's an image in our mind that we're seeing. Quantum physics is saying that's the nature. Our seemingly physical material universe is of the nature of that rainbow. It doesn't exist out there. We become entranced to think it does. If we see something, an object, and it's red, and we then just unconsciously impute, oh, we're seeing the color of that object. No, that red is actually the interaction of our psyche with the external world, and we're then having a subjective experience of the color red. That's the primary stuff. That is called qualia, you know?
Yes, I was just going to say this qualia, participant observers. Chapter 16 of your book, you entitle Lifting the Veil.
Right.
And it seems like this is what you're describing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we live in apocalyptic times, that's clear.
Yeah.
And, the word apocalypse, I'm sure everybody knows, means like, something is being revealed or being unveiled.
Mm.
And, so for me, the question really comes down to, are there going to be sufficient people who really, take in to their own being, to their own minds and hearts, what is being revealed, about the nature of reality, that we are actually playing an active participatory role in invoking the reality that we then experience as other than ourselves. That's the spell, that's the illusion. And, there's a beautiful image in his work. Jung conjures up an image of, you have a glass of water, you dissolve sugar one by one, a grain of sugar, and it'll just dissolve and dissolve, and then it reaches the saturation point, and you add one more grain of sugar and a crystal manifests. And he makes the point, that's a way of understanding, the way symbols will crystallize out of and into the unconscious. And it's also a way of understanding maybe even one person, because what Jung also says is the way, to deal with the craziness and the evil in our world is not to, politically, I mean, yeah, we can create new laws and rules that might be palliative measures, but it operates through the individual, that we are the carrier of this world. And it could be that any one of us, even right in this very moment, having the realization of our nature, could be that grain of sugar that precipitates, entire awakening in the collective unconscious. And yeah.
That's beautiful, or as Jung called it, yeah, crystallization. Um, I want to be respectful of our time. I just have a couple of more questions.
Yeah,
You used a really interesting word I hadn't heard before. I think I'm going to pronounce it correctly. Anamnesis,
yeah, 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 totally.
which is the opposite of amnesia, forgetting. Anamnesis refers to an unforgetting. Can you say
Right.
something about that?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
want
yeah. No, I definitely can. So I point out, and I had finished in my current book, the one that came out a year ago, the third volume on the mind virus.
to.
I point out that the deep archetypal process that's happening on our world is like the archetype of the shamanic archetype
Mm.
is activated, and the archetype of the shaman basically. And I finished this chapter literally weeks before the lockdown, in the pandemic.
Mm.
And I didn't even realize how prescient I was being, because here we were all collectively descending into the darkness, into the underworld. And that's what happens when somebody gets called to be a shaman. And no one ever in their right mind would ever choose to be a shaman, because the suffering is just so overwhelming. And the shaman is the creative artist, by the way, and the shaman is the storyteller, the shaman is the dreamer. And I point out that we are all shamans in training. And so the idea being that, we, by making that descent, um, we go into the realm of darkness, of evil, of, wounding, trauma, demons. We're all suffering from a form of PTSD. And actually, let me ask you, because it just vaporized in my mind, the
Sure.
specific question you asked that made me answer with
Yeah,
Sean. What was
this
the no?
this concept of an unforgetting
Oh
and
yeah, the unforgetting. Right, right, right. Totally. Because so we're all like, the shamanic archetype is activated in our psyches, in the collective unconscious. What that means, that always gets activated by a trauma when we dissociate because an experience is overwhelming, we become traumatized. That over time constellates the would-be shaman to go in search of their split off part. That's typically conceived of as being frozen back in the amber of time. And when you actually connect with that younger part that was traumatized, that stopped growing, and you like retrieve that part of your soul, and the idea is to remember, to put your member back together, to retrieve that soul. In other words, that's the anamnesia, that's the unforgetting. It's to remember something, but what you unforget, it's not necessarily just a historical event that happened in time. It's you actually remember and unforget the eternal part of us, the part of us that's connected, with the creative source, the part of us that's connected with the self. And so that whole idea of unforgetting, of anamnesia, that's the process that all of us are in, is remembering who we are. And quantum physics is like the most incredible tool when you actually have the realization of what it's revealing to us. And it's so obvious and it's so simple. I don't want people to think, oh, it's so complicated and I'm not that smart. Like I'm trying to say, I'm not a physicist. I know nothing about how to do physics in the nuts and bolts way, but I just, was fortunate enough to have the recognition that, wait a second, something is being shown to us via the revelation and the discovery of quantum physics.
Incredible. Well, Paul, the name of your book, The Quantum Revelation, A Radical Synthesis of Science and Spirituality, is going to be re-released in December with a new subtitle by Inner Traditions and here in Rochester, Vermont. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I could just say something about that, just real
Please.
quick,
Yeah.
and that, the one of the things, there are two major things that are different about because I got more downloads. And on the one hand is the idea of it's called quantum contextuality, that the idea is that context is everything. And, at a certain point in my life, I was making art and painting, and I would realize, well, I would have this color that I thought was gray, but if it was next to a blue, it looked purple. But if it was next to a different color, it looked gray. And oh my God, my experience of that color, it depended on the context. And in quantum physics, they're basically pointing out that that context is everything. So one way to understand this, if you have like this puzzle, like this jigsaw puzzle, in the classical world, it doesn't make a difference how you put the pieces together, whether it's from the center or from the outside, you always get the same final image. In a quantum world, and this is a quantum world, if you start putting the puzzle together from the outside, you will get a different image than if you start putting together the puzzle from the center. And and this is very helpful in viewing world events, where say there's like a conflict or there's a war, and depending on where you start the story, the context, the lens through which you view what's happening, that is how you interpret it. That creates the meaning that you impute onto it. So that's a major thing that quantum physics is pointing at. And keep in mind, quantum physics, I think the biggest chapter in the book is all about how quantum physics affects us in our everyday lives.
Yes.
We experience quantum physics way more than we do classical physics. And every moment is quantum, and it affects our relationship. And I have a lot to say about that, but I'll hold off for now. But the other part of the book that's new is about Terma, is about the hidden treasure. That quantum physics, I can't say enough about this sort of miracle-like quality of these hidden treasures. And, it's like a multi-level vitamin that gets secreted by the universe right at the point that it's needed, or it's like a lock, it's like a key that unlocks a lock, or it's like a charm that breaks a spell. That's a way to conceive of these termas, or it's like an alarm clock that goes off to wake us up right at the moment in time. And I'm pointing out, and I really go into it deeper, that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a terma. It's an alarm clock. It's helping us to wake up, but being quantum in nature, it will only do that if we participate in its revelation, if we recognize what it's revealing to us. Then we'll get all the benefits. But if we don't recognize what it's showing us, well, then it won't have any effect.
Wow. So the terma and quantum contextuality are two additions to the new version of the book coming out in December.
Right.
Amazing. I can't wait. Well, last question. We love to talk with you again, and Paul, and maybe the focus of our next conversation can be your work around Wetiko, the mind virus. Can you just say perhaps a word to tease
Yeah.
us?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So this is not just my idea. I'm just a translator. This is in every spiritual tradition, and so many visionaries and thinkers. And in the apocryphal texts, they talk about the counterfeiting spirit, that impersonates us. That's Wetiko. Of course, it got edited out of the Bible because I point out Wetiko was on the editorial board, and it can't stand to be exposed. And so Wetiko, it can be thought of as a mind virus. But when people hear that and they think, oh, that's kind of new agey woo-woo, all that it really means is that the source and the solution of the collective madness that's playing out in our world is to be found within the psyche. And that's a no-brainer. Where else in the world could the source of our madness be found? And what I'm pointing out, in essence, and this really completes the circle to quantum physics, is that this mind virus, that the Wetiko mind virus, is quantum in nature. And what I mean by that, just like quantum physics, in contemplating the nature of light, it discovered, oh my God, depending on how it's observed, sometimes light manifests as a wave, other times as a particle. It's a function of the questions we ask, how we set up our experiments, how we interpret the data. Well, in the same way, this mind virus, it's a superposition of states. It's a quantum phenomena that it contains encoded within it the greatest evil, the source of the greatest evil that we experience, both individually, in relationship with each other, and collectively in the body politic of the world. And it contains encoded within it its own vaccine. And not only its own vaccine, it actually contains within it the most incredible gift and blessing. It's actually helping us to evolve and to awaken. So this mind virus, being quantum in nature, it contains both the deepest evil and the most incredible light, and how it manifests depends on if we recognize what it's revealing to us. That this mind virus is a revelation, just like quantum physics is a living revelation. It's a known archetypal thing that in times of darkness, you should open your eyes to see how the revelation it's during dark times, that's when, revelations emerge. Think about the compensatory nature of the unconscious. And so, yeah, our discussion, I look so forward to when we talk about the mind virus, because it'll totally even more deepen what I'm trying to say about the revelation that is quantum physics.
Yes, and I've made a note here. We'll the brothers and I will make sure we get new editions of your quantum revelation book. And
Well, I could actually be in touch, because they're so close to you within a tradition, and have them even send you, like a pre-publication copy.
that'd be amazing.
And because I think it's available, and yeah,
That'd
that'd
be
be great.
that'd be amazing. And as you say, we'll connect the quantum with Wetiko in our next conversation. Paul, where can people go to find out more about your work?
Yeah, well, if they want to find more about, what I do, the way I say it, if they are interested if they want to awaken in the dream, go to awakenindthedream.com, AWAKEN in thedream.com. And, ton of articles, ton of interviews, it's all for free. People criticize me, I haven't monetized it, but I don't want to. I want to just get this stuff out because it's real medicine for people. And of course, people can, buy my books or set up sessions. But other than that, there's no paywall or anything. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Awakeninthedream.com is your website. Well, Paul Levy, this has been just a mind expanding conversation. And thank you on behalf of Philip and Michael and Ian Baldwin, the Marion Institute. Thank you for making the time. And we look forward to our next conversation.
Well, yeah, can't thank you enough. It's really my honor. Thank you.
Yes. And we'll talk again soon.
Great.
Welcome to the Requesting Room. Dr. Rob Williams, your host, with the three Baldwin brothers, Michael and Ian and Philip, here today to talk about Paul Levy's The Quantum Revelation, a Radical Synthesis of Science and Spirituality. Gentlemen, what did you make of the quantum revelation?
Well, I thought it was a very absorbing interview. And there was something I liked about Mr. Levy, and I didn't necessarily expect to. But I found it may have to do with my own meager background in Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. But he struck me with his talk about terma and the whole quantum phenomenon as he's himself informed by this past and now present. It's both past and present. It's a tradition that locks into the quantum field body of thought. So it's very, that connection was very interesting. It also, his key point, the dreamlike nature of reality, which overturns in a very, very radical way science. It is the most important scientific development of not our lifetimes, of humanity's lifetime, if you can speak of that as humanity having a lifetime. Because what we have all believed for hundreds of years in the West, there is an objective reality. And then there's this observing entity which must cut itself off in order to properly observe, measure, quantify what it's studying. Boom! No, there is only subjective reality because the mind is creating the universe. And that's the quantum revolution. There are more questions than I can answer about it, but that is an extraordinary observation that nothing can be properly measured under the thesis that we are wholly separate from what we're observing. We're in a field. And there's no separation between the two. The observer affects what is the observed, and likely vice versa. I'm out of my depth already. But one of the things I found fun, looking back at Lynn's very interesting background. She had the Buddha behind her, a statue, and a dreamer on the wall, and I couldn't take my eyes off the dreamer. So this was very interesting. The echo back to the past, the Vajrayana tradition, which deeply informs Paul Levy, and the whole idea of reality being a dream, but not the kind of dream that the Eastern tradition had, in other words, Maya, illusion, more an active sense of we're propagating through our imaginative interaction with things, including in a scientific framework. We're interacting with a field that is not just Maya, an illusion, but an enactment. I'm already gone too far, and not far enough. So I'll surrender to someone else. But I'm groping for something, and maybe the brothers could pick up on what I'm trying to grope for, because I think it's important.
Philip, you want to go?
Well, sure. It's, I don't want to use the word tricky. It is extraordinarily delicate and requires a discernment above and beyond my capacity to entirely get my mind around all of this. On some instinctual level, I agree entirely with what Lynn McTaggart said in the previous talk, and what Paul Levy is saying in this one. And yet there's a little piece of me that can't help but being a little sympathetic to Mr. Einstein, who looked up at the moon and he said, "Hey, you're going to tell me that thing's not there?" Okay, we're imagining it's there, but we're all imagining that it's there. So if that's the case, and we're all imagining it, it does speak dramatically to the power of our imaginations. I certainly find myself at home with the notion of mind and matter being inseparable, that there's as much of my brain in the tip of my finger as there is inside my cranium. But you know that Einstein and Bohr, they went back and forth about this throughout. I mean, the Copenhagen incident supposedly put it to bed. But when Niels Bohr, when he died, and they went into his bedroom or his office, and he had a blackboard up on the wall, and he'd written a note on there to the effect that, well, you know, I'm not necessarily right. In other words, he too, scientist that he was working on an element of faith. And of course, quantum physics is a theory, and we know it works, at least in a great many ways. And it's a theory. In some degree, it's based on faith. And yeah, I find that I find that almost reassuring. I think that's all for the moment. Maybe, Mikey, you'd like to carry on from there.
The thing that I was going to bring up was Terma. And of course, I find it absolutely fascinating, where we all, I think, had a suspicion that quantum physics would go, is where I would suggest he takes it, which is into this realm that sort of mirrors, or, you know, is parallel or in sync with, as Ian says, Vajrayana Buddhism, or Tantric Buddhism, Dzogchen, a particularly esoteric practice in Tibetan Buddhism. And Terma, he spends a lot of time on Terma. And, you know, these are these hidden treasures that we read about through him and otherwise. And they come up, they get discovered at this right moment in time when the world is particularly out of balance. And so they are these miraculous forms of transmission, all planted by the great Padma Sambhava, Guru Rinpoche, who brought Buddhism to Tibet in the 9th century. And one of the most famous is the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I think what he's suggesting is that where quantum physics has now gone in its understanding about the nature of reality is, in actual fact, a terma to wake us up at a very critical time in the evolution of this earth and the condition of the human species. And that I find, if I got it right, that to me is quite fascinating as to what a more viral grasp and understanding of where quantum physics is taking us could maybe rebalance the world or something. That's it. That's me.
Rob, when you interview Paul, or perhaps any qualified authority on quantum phenomena, you discussed with him Einstein as being part of the movement or part of the revolution called quantum. You didn't use the word mechanics, but that's the word that comes to my mind because of what I've read. That whole revolution involved Einstein. Now, it was started by, as far as I know, Max Planck in 1900. I've forgotten, Planck's constant came out of that. And it choo-chooed along, and Einstein then did his special relativity in 1905, general relativity, if I have my dates correct, I may not, in 1915, on up through Heisenberg in the 20s, the it's the indeterminacy principle.
The uncertainty principle.
Yeah. Uncertainty. So it's never been clear to me. Philip points out that Einstein, I don't remember the exact, but maybe he pointed to the moon and said, well, what do you mean it's not there in reality? Of course it's there in reality. Is there another way to formulate how something like the moon exists? But this gets into the subtlety and the, frankly, slipperiness of this whole subject.
Right.
But setting that aside, it is very interesting to me, and I think to my brothers, what exactly, how was Einstein part of the formulation of this revolutionary understanding of the universe and life? How was he? Because he didn't like it.
No.
Allegedly he was one of the birthing fathers, and as far as I know, they were mostly fathers of this thing, but he disowned it.
Yeah.
I think it's going too far to say he disowned it.
Mm-hmm.
He took issue with it.
He took deep issue.
Well, yeah.
But there is this, he in some way, as I recall, accepted it. I did, because I was asking myself the same question earlier, and I got out the Carlo Rovelli book, Helgoland, in which he describes quite wonderfully the whole sequence of each domino going from Planck and before Planck and and Heisenberg and so forth.
Philip, which book is that of Rovelli's?
Carlo Rovelli, Helgoland, which is very much a a historical accounting of how we got to this. It rests with the science, let's put it that way. And I guess it was the Copenhagen conference,
yes,
where they came to a sort of definitive declaration of different stands. That was already in the late 20s, but the conversation until Einstein died, which was what, 1954 or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Einstein, as Levy points out, Einstein spent far more time thinking about the quantum universe than he did about relativity.
I think you're right.
Again, I would like to understand.
Yeah.
How is relativity theory connected to or bound up in quantum theory? How do you differentiate these two?
Because you can't, am I right? Sorry to interrupt, but am I right? You can't get to quantum except through relativity. Is that fair to say?
I can't answer that.
I can't
that would be part of the answer. I mean, the conversation.
Ian, I've written that down. I think that would be a question for all of us to ask of both Lynn and Paul, Lynn McTaggart
Absolutely.
and Paul Levy, in our next conversations with them, perhaps. I did push both of them a little bit on Einstein. But of course, when you're in the flow of conversation, you go where the conversation takes you. Before we wrap up, I was thinking to all of this, you know, we all know Einstein's most famous equation. I think his most famous observation is the one that goes something like this: imagination is more important than knowledge.
That's a quantum statement.
Well, right. I never thought of it as a quantum statement before, but I think that beautifully captures Einstein's ambivalence and ultimately his acknowledgement of the quantum over the objective mechanical scientific paradigm, where we posit knowledge as a detached objective observer. Imagination, as both Lynn and Paul teach us, is an active participatory endeavor. I like the word you used in one of our conversations, enactment. That's a really interesting word, enactment. Imagination is about enactment.
The other word is participatory, and we're in a participatory universe, and that is also, it's not just quantum mechanics that Buddhism and other religions cope with that or express that.
Yeah.
But what Philip said, did quantum mechanics rest on Einstein's relativity theory, the two books, Special and General, or is it a separate development? I've never understood that. It's fundamental. I mean, given the terrain we're now on.
Yeah, I think we should ask that of Lev next talk with him. And maybe that's a good place to leave it. Michael, you mentioned the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and Paul Levy has written the introduction to a brand new version of that book, which isn't even out yet. It's coming out in a week or two.
Right.
And then, of course, there'll be a second edition of the Quantum Revelation being published by the end of this year, 2024, with our dear friends down the road here in Vermont at Inner Traditions Publishing in Rochester. So clearly, we have more fruitful conversations with Paul Levy ahead.
Good.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks to Ian and Michael and Philip Baldwin, and of course our sponsor, the Marian Institute, and looking forward to our future conversations, gentlemen.
Good.
Thank you.
Yes. See you soon.
Rob.